punishment in and of itself.
Just to understand, so basically what you're saying is that Adam was, the only thing that changed before he ate the apple was his perception.
Precisely. You got it brilliant. Exactly. Nothing changed and everything changed. Nothing changed in Adam's reality. Just his perception. And in perception, guys, when we talk about perception, now we're entering into a remarkable world.
So why did there need to be an action?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you need an action in order for the perception to change? If this was all inside of him, why do you need the act itself?
Well, I think, first of all, don't forget that the story is told in such a manner so people can read it. You cannot really, for us to be able to discuss this story and deal with it on the level that we're dealing with it now, we have to deal, unfortunately, but that's the way we are as humans, we have to deal with external things. That's part of religion as well. Why do so many people treat God as if God is truly different than them? Until today, most people, when they talk about God, they conceptually perceive God as something that is separate from them. And that's not the situation at all, according to what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is that, do not read the first verse of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, as if it translates into, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but rather read it, the heavens and the earth are God in creation. Mm-hmm. In other words, that now the human is first of all part of God, an extension of divinity, that can now activate that divine potential throughout its life. And at the same time, we are that part of God which still does not understand the fullest ramifications of what I just said. We still see a barrier between us and God. We still try to establish a relationship with God. And in order to establish a relationship with anything, there needs to be a distinction between one and the other. And I come and say something different. There is no real distinction between you and God. The story is now told to those who perceive in dualistic terms. Good versus bad, life versus death, and also man versus God. I think that once you reverse that mechanism, as it were, going back to the Garden of Eden, as it were, puking that fruit, as it were, you're actually getting rid of certain key terms that made you believe in your life that there is actual difference between one and the other. And then you are coming to a more unified sense, a more unified understanding of who you are. I think that the story is told for people who are already reading the story from a dualistic perspective. That's why it has to become tangible. I think that once you pass that barrier, you're right, all of it can become the internal landscape of perception rather than walking in a garden and eating a fruit and dealing with a tree and so on and so forth. Yeah, I saw another, yeah.
להיות שותף במעשה בראשית, does that sum up what you just said?
Of course, to be a partner in the act of creation, of course. And it's not just a partner, it's more than a partner. Arthur Green, the theologian Arthur Green, once put it very beautifully. He said there's an article called Speaking in Thunder, and he said it there, he said, the only God I know is a divinity that cannot be experienced in this world at all except through human actions. In other words, you are talking about a human condition whose intimacy with the divine is far more radical than you believe. It's not in your face. The eyes, your eyes that are asking, where is God, are already part of God looking for itself. So one theologian once put it, humans are that part of God which tries to understand all of God. We are in search of something, not necessarily understanding or fully aware of the fact that the force that is searching is already part of what the quest is. That's why I don't say search for yourself and you'll find God. It's not a cliche. So now, guys, I want us to go to the last verse. before we wrap this up, and that's in the second page, on the back page. And that is something that God says after God brings the flood on the generation of Noah. And I always found this verse very, very interesting. Because it says something that also sent scores of theologians and philosophers and thinkers about what does God mean and that. And the Lord smelled the sweet savor that Noah and his sons are giving God after the flood. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for men's sake. Why? For the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite anymore everything living as I have done. What do you understand from this verse about God's perception of the human of the human condition? And that goes to your earlier question about good and evil at the beginning of the lesson. What do you understand God says here? How do you interpret this verse? And by the way, I understand the word evil as bad, not evil, bad, based on the distinction we make.
He is what he is, and we are what we are.
So you are saying the inclination of a man's heart is bad from his youth. That's who he is. Is that an inherent property in your mind?
It's an inherent potentiality. That's what free will is.
Yeah. What do you make here? Why doesn't God say the inclination of a man's heart is evil from his birth? Why from his youth? Why, if it's inherent, why from his conception? Why from his youth?
Puberty.
His upbringing.
Ah. Nurture versus nature. Precisely. Evil is a learned property, not an inherent one. The inclination may be there. Its actualization, the belief in its power, in its advantage, in its existence as a necessary property on earth, as so many people believe, is something of our own device that we learn about and we start entertaining here as from our youth, as it were. Youth is already, you're well entrenched in history, you're well entrenched in this world. You've already learned a thing or two. You now believe that evil, or your inclination towards evil, is already well established. God says nothing about evil being a necessary property for existing.
But you're not saying anything about culture and definition of what that is. Which is a problem, because I mean, the thorns that went bad for me. That was my experience of it. It wasn't that experience for the thorn bush,
Mm-hmm.
So same goes for people and for rules of society.
I didn't use the word societies and fashion and many other things. I did allude to that, I thought, when I talked about the difference between bad or evil as an event and bad or evil as a perception. And the perception, of course, is managed also by culture, by historical context.
It just says very well.
Here in this verse, he comes and says, people have introduced the reality of evil as part of life, as a necessary part of life. Today, when you ask most people, they will tell you, look, there's nothing you can do. Evil is... shit happens. This is the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. And I'm saying no.
But one thing that's always puzzled me about the Noah story is that God only learns it at this point, or only seems to learn it at this point. Like before this, he didn't know.
Yeah, what happened to Kol Tzafui?
Exactly. God learns it because of man's choices. Yes.
God also
But
evolves.
he knew that was a possible choice.
It's a possible choice,
So
and he regrets.
So why is he only there now?
No, he regrets the fact that one of the possible choices that sucks was chosen by humanity. And remember what we said earlier to your question. Bad has to exist as a potentiality. Otherwise, there's no point of having a free will. So God cannot blame men for having an inclination of evil. God can only blame men for having actualized that inclination.
But you're also saying that man can be without evil.
Yeah, of course.
No.
Why? You have to.
I
You have
think
to.
there's evil, I see it that there's evil in all of us. There's potential evil.
That's right. I said that all along. The question is, do you have to exist? Do you, as part of your life,
Have to commit evil.
have to
things.
commit evil? Do you have to?
No, you choose to.
You choose.
Yeah.
You choose.
But you choose to.
And by the way, I want to break another myth, because a lot of people say, wait a minute, there's a difference between, I'll make a difference, between the cessation of good and the activation of evil.
Where's the line?
And I say, no, there is no such a thing. There is no cessation of good. Good is. If you do evil, then there is a cessation of good. But there is no cessation of good without evil.
But if you do evil, is there a cessation of good? The other way around, yeah.
Could you go over again the difference between bad and evil?
Bad is an existential potential. The tree of knowledge, the tree of differentiation between good and bad. Evil, according to my analysis, is the conscious choice to activate that potential in your life. Like she just said, we all have the inclination for bad.
We're all bad, but we don't
It
have
is
to be
inherent. The inclination is inherent.
That's the bad.
That's the bad. If I now commit to come and hurt you,
That's
I
evil.
did an evil action.
Okay.
Because it's a choice. There is no evil. That's why I asked you the question, has any one of you ever done evil without having a choice in the matter?
That was a trick
There's
question.
something missing here.
Yeah.
in my opinion,
Yeah.
But you haven't covered.
That
You have not covered,
yeah,
which I think is important.
yeah.
Punishment. Especially the biblical view happens to late in the 20th century because of our actions.
Again, it depends on how you read it. And of course, I'm not suggesting that my way of looking at it is the only way. Of course not. What I'm trying to say here is that the kind of linear perception of good leads to reward, bad leads to punishment is erroneous, or at the very least, simplistic.
This is what you're saying, but most of Judaism has always thought because of our deeds, this is why we were punished, and so forth.
Again, we're punished, meaning what? That God, an external God, punished us? Or that our deeds led to this trajectory?
Our deeds led to this trajectory.
So actually, because of our deeds, we punished ourselves.
But I agree with you.
Yeah.
But in most of Judaic thinking, I don't know if they differentiated that.
Popular.
The same answer I gave her.
Okay.
The rendition is very, very simplistic.
Okay.
Look, the way it is portrayed is very simplistic, much, much more simplistic than what I'm giving you.
Which I can't believe that the rabbis did not differentiate on this.
Oh no, they have. They just don't necessarily talk about it in popular discourse.
Uh,
But if you actually read Hasidic discourse on matters of, for example, Galut, exile, Hasidic discourse about the Holocaust, other elements that try to deal with divine so-called punishment, and they say, "Mipnei chataenu galinu ma'atzenu," because of our sins we were exiled. They don't come and say God now knocks on our heads. It is our misdemeanor led us to go astray. Our misdemeanor led us to go on this trajectory. Our misdemeanor
That's the bad decision.
is the seed of the punishment. And the punishment itself in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, is the actual tree, as it were, the actual actualization of that seed which we have planted. We have planted it.
Could we say, given what you say, God is absolute in this metaphor, but even an absolute being can still learn and evolve. So doesn't that answer this question about why did God do things in the first place and that he learns from things?
The term evolution here is again problematic because in the human mind,
It's related
evolution suggests something greater than what was there before.
Well, maybe God is greater than he was.
Well, I'm looking at it differently. I'm saying that God is absolute in potentiality, and that the evolution of God within this infinite potentiality is at the hands of men. And that we don't cease from surprising God every moment of our lives because of our choices.
Could you say that again?
I don't think that God is bored for a single second, because God is surprised and sometimes bewildered and sometimes rejoices and sometimes happy about our choices.
I think he's a stand-up comic.
I think it's a very cynical sense of humor sometimes when I look at some of the people he had created, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, but in this instance, he admits to having made a mistake.
Why? Why made a mistake?
No. He changes his. He says. First of all, there's a lesson of personal responsibility. We make the choices and we bear the consequences. God made us in that way, and He has to bear the consequences. And getting pissed off at what the human race has done to the earth, as he comes to realize, is not an acceptable choice. What the hell did he expect? What did he want when he made man b'tzelmo? And therefore his, as it's portrayed, at least simplistically, his anger, whatever that means,
Right.
And destruction of the earth through the flood was not legitimate, as he himself pronounces when he says he will never do it again.
Look, if God comes and says to you, look, I suggest to you that you don't do A, and if you do A, you will bear the consequences. But I cannot prevent you from doing A. But if you do A, I will hit you.
That's the popular version.
And you did A, and you get hit, don't complain to God. That's number one. Number two is that what I find fascinating in this is what you said, is that the Torah does not shy away, albeit sometimes by many rabbis reluctantly, from admitting, as it were, that God also learns something about mankind as mankind evolves. In other words, God knows all of what mankind is capable of doing, but He's surprised of the actual decisions that man is doing. And those bring His wrath and then bring His anger. And then. So I agree with you. I mean, I think that to a certain degree, God should have been bigger than this, as it were. But at the same time, again,
it's a very interesting idea of the sort of the Jewish view of the so-called omniscient God, because God created man in His image, and man continually surprises Him, and God learns about man's potentiality, which means that He's learning about His own potentiality.
Absolutely.
Aha.
No,
So all this is very nice when we take personal responsibility and we realize what a gift we have in life. How do you account for illness or for children who have terrible illness? I mean, how do we live with that? How do we account for that?
First of all, the assumption that I have the question of bad solved is erroneous. I have still many questions that I have absolutely no resolution for. What I can tell you is that I think that there is still a great distance between what we perceive as other people's experiences and their experiences in reality. I'll give an example of autism, for example. Or even of people, God forbid, who are vegetables or in a coma or in a stage of deep comatose. People judge them, as it were. Yeah, judge them. I mean, people refer to them only based on the level of encounter or interchange that can have with them on the level that we can identify, which usually is the outer shell. And we come and say, if their brain is damaged, that means that there is absolutely no activity there, blah, blah, blah. And I say, don't confuse the author with the typewriter. The fact that the typewriter is broken does not mean that the author is not brilliant anymore. It just means that he cannot write. So don't confuse the brain with the mind.
Okay.
So I remind myself, for example, that a lot of people who have no full brain activity or challenged in such a way, I make absolutely no judgment about their mental capability, about their internal dialogue with themselves or monologue, and the richness of their inner world. Because quite honestly, I have absolutely no access to that world. And for me, that's their real kingdom. The second point I'll say is...
A Down syndrome person could have a richer internal world than we do.
As far as I know, absolutely. And I have absolutely no right to judge him, again, based on his brain. Definitely not based on his looks. And we do, unfortunately. We assume that if the typewriter is damaged, then there is no real author inside. And I say there's no connection between
Only
the
a
two.
few hundred years ago, deaf people were regarded as idiots.
Yeah. The second thing is, and again, I don't want to end this because I really don't want to belittle in any shape or form anybody's own stories or tragedies, God forbid. I think that if our perception of death changed dramatically, it would also have a profound effect on our perception of suffering in this world.
Absolutely.
And again, I know that I'm entering here something that is so.
I have a very comfortable relationship with death.
No, I'm talking about other
I have a
people.
problem when an 8-year-old child gets hit by a car and is killed.
Or cancer.
But okay, yeah,
From
I'm
cancer.
with you. And again, I don't want to.
And maybe he is going to a fabulous world and he got there, express. But that's
So who's-
really hard to digest.
Yeah, but whose pain? Again, I want to be very gentle. If an 8-year-old kid, and again, God forbid, I'm not saying that. I want to be very clear on this, especially for the ones who are listening to this. If an 8-year-old, God forbid, is hit by a car and killed, and his soul goes to another place, whose pain are we really talking about here?
Ours.
We're left behind.
Okay, that's all I want us to think about for a second, because I think that in many ways we self-project our own pain into the victim and then double the amount of pain we're dealing with instead of actually, and again, I'm not judging anyone, I'm not saying, I'm not giving critique, but what we're doing is we're doubling the amount of suffering on behalf of the person who had died without even knowing what he's going through or she's going through, and perhaps, and again, perhaps death, even an early death, is a great gift. Perhaps we are the ones who should lament for ourselves for staying here for so long. I don't know. All I know is that I need to do the best I can with the time allotted to me, and not judge those who are staying behind me or left earlier than me. And to focus on that notion, I think, is exceedingly difficult. But I think one of the reasons it's so difficult is also because we have a very skewed perception of what death is. And I think that that's one venue of revisiting that kind of, without, again, belittling in any way the profound pain that
Would you
anybody
say
has
that to
within.
the parent?
No.
Again, I would say it as something to think. I would not. Again, this is why I'm saying it and I'm retracting and I'm clarifying myself. I'm not belittling the sense of pain. God forbid. It's painful. The separation is painful. The fact that you cannot be. It's painful. All I'm saying is that once we try to grapple with the way we project pain and what is really ours and what is really theirs, the person who passed, we see that actually the ratio here is 100% ours, nothing theirs. And that may allow us to revisit that whole world in a different manner. Not to belittle by any means, I'm not saying, just to give a different context and maybe, God willing, get a peace of mind at a certain level. Not
What
to
about
accept
the
it.
parent
Not.
who blames themselves?
That's their problem.
No.
You know, there are levels of human suffering for which I have nothing to say but to bow my head and say at this point I'm
Be
silent.
quiet. Yes.
That's it.
Nothing.
But all I'm saying here is that there are a lot of our pain is not because the event is evil, but because we perceive it as such. That's all I'm saying.